extremely hard to get your hands on a copy of this. I'm super grateful that I was able to get one. Right now on Amazon, this book is roughly around $1,200 used, with only one copy left in stock. So this just goes to show the power that exists inside a book like this. Welcome to the Library of Awakening, hosted by CyberX, a space where curiosity meets courage and ideas come alive. Here we explore the thoughts that challenge, inspire, and sometimes even unsettle us, because growth often begins with discomfort. So welcome to the journey. May this space inspire you to ask questions, explore the unknown, and most importantly, to awaken. This is the Library of Awakening. Alrighty, Library of Awakening family, what is going on? Welcome back to another video breakdown. Boy, do I have a treat for you all today, because the physical copy of the Crucifixion of Truth finally came in. I've been telling you guys that I want to read this chapter to you guys for some time now. And so that is what we're going to dive into today. We're going to dive into chapter 4, titled Gods and Church Councils, where it discusses and talks about the Council of the Nicaea, the individual group of individuals that had their hand in early Christianity and orchestrated and manipulated portions of biblical scripture. And so this chapter is going to open a lot of people's minds. So make sure that you guys pay very close attention before we dive into this chapter today. Now, because I do not have a PDF version of this book, it's extremely hard to find on the internet. So I went ahead and I got the physical copy for you guys. I just want to show you all real fast. Before I do, I just want to shout out to everybody that shows this channel love and support. We have smashed through 500 followers on X. We are well on our way to 200 subscribers on YouTube. So if you're new here, do me a favor, smash that thumbs up button and subscribe. Don't forget to head over to X, follow us on Twitter, as we do post a lot of the books that we have inside our private CyberX Discord over on X on a daily, consistent basis. But I just wanted to give you guys a shout out for the love and the support that you show this platform, and we really do appreciate it. Let's continue to grow and educate the masses, one book, one post at a time. So real fast, we've shared in previous video breakdowns another one of Tony Bushby's books, who is the author and gentleman of this book here, The Crucifixion of Truth. Like I mentioned, the physical copy came in, where we read, I believe it was chapter maybe 6 and 7 in The Secret in the Bible. Phenomenal information. This book of his can be found inside our private CyberX Discord. Highly suggest it. Reading thoroughly through it. It will absolutely change your whole entire perspective on religion and the origins of religion and so on and so forth. But this book here is probably one of the deepest books that I've ever read on the origins of Christianity. And if I'm being completely honest, there's a reason for it. Now, I don't know if you guys can see my screen. Let's see if you can. There you go. Okay. But just check out how expensive this book is. Now, I'll sit here and speculate on why that is. I personally think it's because they don't want people to know the information that is withheld inside this book. But wow, just to get a physical copy of this book, you're looking at paying over $1,000, right? So do me a favor, smash that thumbs up button and subscribe. The fact that I was able to get my hands on a copy of this book, you can see there on Amazon, there's only one left in stock, and you're looking at $1,211 plus tax for this book here. Well, we're going to dive into chapter 4 today for you guys. So just looking at the brief description of this, it says the recent publication of ancient scriptures revealed incontrovertible, what's an interesting word, incontrovertible evidence of an intrinsic system of priestly fraudulence operating within Christianity. This book also exposes a church in which false pretenses are the basis of its existence, and forged texts form the essence of its history and preaching. So we're going to dive into this one today. And again, like I mentioned, I don't have the PDF to share with you guys today, so I'll leave it on this pretty image so that way you guys don't have to look at my face the entire time. Or maybe I will expand this and I will let's see here. Let's go ahead and bring me up to stage, and I'll keep that kind of in the background there. So let's dive in. All right. If you guys enjoy this read, we have about maybe 10 pages to get through today. Smash that thumbs up and then subscribe. Like I mentioned, we do appreciate the love and the support. So starting off, so you guys can see, I'm reading chapter 4 here. I don't know if you guys can see that. I've already taken the initiative to read it, make some of my own highlights. What a phenomenal read. I can't wait to finish the entirety of this book here. So starting off, it says, new research material. After the publication of the Bible fraud, amount of new a voluminous amount of new research material was sent in by groups and individuals supporting the findings presented in that book. So it seems like another good book that we will possibly tap into. The rabbinic sources provided fresh data, as did researchers and translators of old Christian texts, and various biblical sources supplied previously unavailable material that related to Christian origins. I wish I could I wish I could turn. Maybe I will. Let's see if I could turn a little bit. Turn my mic. I don't know. I just feel like you guys are missing out on actually seeing the script. Let's stop sharing and let's extend this out. And I'll turn a little bit there. Okay. Of particular interest was a collection of 35 millimeter color slides taken of an ancient New Testament by the monks of an abbey in Cumbria, northern England, and presented to support their argument that British Celtic Church preceded Roman Catholicism by 600 years. That the British Celtic Church preceded Roman Catholicism by 600 years. The abbot claimed that specific New Testament was written in 528, and its availability to this author, along with the second century Acta Canobiline, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, introduced previously undisclosed information about Jesus Christ and the true nature of the first ecclesiastical council. The Abbey records violently opposed the modern-day Orthodox presentation of events associated with that gathering and reveal priesthood deception of the highest magnitude. The Church defines its general councils as an assembly of individuals professing Christianity and consisting of those who held ecclesiastical offices with the precincts of the diocese or parish of a primitive pastor or bishop, who disclaim private judgment and who met to deliberate on ecclesiastical matters, whether of faith, morals, or discipline. Yet, in the first 300 years of the Roman Church, the most important time in the development of our faith, the concept of the convening meeting to discuss the developmental aspects of religion was unknown, a fact acknowledged at the 18-year-long Council of Trent. Then it has a quote here, and it says, there are so many questions to be answered and difficulties to be obviated with the great uncertainty of those centuries, for it is doubtful whether administrators convened and whether diocesan councils, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, diocesan council or synods were held. Christians not forsake the Church of God, however, for later general councils determined that because history transmitted to us no such account of guidelines of infallibility, such deliberations were deemed to have been assembled in the name of Christ and considered synonymous as being assembled by the authority of Christ. We can go ahead and stop sharing this screen. The folly of such retrospective decree should strike every discerning person with a full conviction of its untruthfulness and its crude attempt to hide the fact that ecclesiastical councils were non-existent in the first 3 centuries of Christianity. In 1828, Protestant Reverend Richard Greer, D.D., wrote an absorbing book called The Epitome of the General Councils of the Church from the Council of Nicaea to the conclusion of the Roman Council of Trent in year 1563. I'm definitely going to jot that one down and see if we can get a copy of that inside the CyberX Discord. A scathing account of the development of the Church of Rome through corrupted and pretended church councils. In his summary, he said, "Do you ask me how councils began? I will tell you. They began in nothing and resulted in the Church of Rome. Ecclesiastical canons conferring the right to call councils or decision-making gatherings were not part of Christian history until well into the 4th century, and even then, they were not officially ratified until the Council of Trent. The whole business of the commencement and development of official assemblies was uncontrolled, irregular, and without directive, and it was the person of Constantine, 272 to 337 or 337, that a particular historic religious gathering was convened. But it was not Christian, as the church today would have us believe. Constantine's father was Emperor Constantius the Pale, a resident of York in Britain and married to Helena, unquestionably a British princess, after upheavals in Lundenagaburg, interesting word, under the tartan-clad queen Boadicea. The ancient city of York became a popular resort, and from there, several Roman emperors had functioned, deeming it a safer haven from which to rule than the vicious city of Rome. Several Roman emperors were buried there. Princess Helena was the daughter of King Qual II, born at Colchester in 248 and died in circa 328. In the Vatican and British museums are coins struck with their name, reading Flavia Helena Augusta, but she was best known as Empress Helena and so recorded in the annals of history. Roman historical records, however, impress Helena was falsely made to appear a Roman native, wife of a Roman, mother of an illustrious Roman son, Flavius Constantine, none of which is true. Empress Helena was British, and so was her son. It is not generally known that Flavius Constantine was British-born and traced his ancestry back to a New Testament family. His lineage was given in the Bible fraud, so it's the second mention of this book. We need to definitely tap into that one. Many in the church denied that fact, but its own records confirm the issue. Eminent Vatican historian Cardinal Caesar Borronius said, "The man must be made who, in the face of universal antiquity, refuses to believe that Constantine and his mother were Britons, born in Britain, and church knowledge is supported by over 20 European historical authorities." Constantius died suddenly at York in 306, and Constantine, then aged 34, was saluted in as leader, and by heredity right, was now king over Britain, Gaul, and Spain. Of importance in this summary are the records of history that record King Constantine the Great as a direct bloodline relation to 1st century King Yasso Canobiline, and that issue is probably the most important aspect in the development of Christianity. Very interesting. When Julius Caesar invaded Britain in 54 BC, King Caswallon I Cassivellaunus to the Romans was king of Britain, and upon his death, Teventius, son of King Lud and Duke of Cornwall, became king. When King Teventius, 37 to year 42, died, Yasso Canobiline became king of Britain, and his Druidic followers were called the men of Yeswa. The term Yesu, or Yeswa, however you say that, was a very sacred identity taught in Druidism as one of the 3 aspects of the Druidic Trinity, the other 2 being Bali and Tehran. Later, King Canobiline was given another Druidic title of Brain or Bran the Blessed, Bran Ab Ben Diajid. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing all these things correctly. The Apolitian originating from the Brenline Pridian, Ol, meaning from the line of religious kings of all Britain. The British chronicles recorded that King Canobiline's jurisdiction covered major parts of southern Britain, including the lower portions of Wales to the west and some portions of the east. This included Tri Noventum, and the pre-Latin version of this word was Troy Novant, originally derived from New Troy, called London today. This author provided evidence in the Bible fraud that the essence of the devout life of King Yusu, or Yesa, Canobiline later became the outline of the gospel story of Jesus Christ. The data provided in that book was confirmed with the release of the Acta Canobiline, by occupants of the Abbey in Cambria, and the existence of that six-volume collection provides devastating evidence against the Church's presentation of Jesus Christ. Acta Canobili was originally written by a teacher called Nidjo or Nidhua, who was born on 24 October 160 and died in April 214. He spent most of his life teaching languages at a college administered by the Druid priesthood in Sechi, now Exeter in Devon. Nidhu spent 6 years compiling his history of Canobiline, and during his research spoke with progeny of the king, some who were students in his class. Toward the end of his life, he presented leather-bound versions of Acta Canobiline to Canobiline's descendants, and the preface in the Cumbrian volumes confirmed that it was one from the original family collection. In the year 267, and under direct instruction from Roman Emperor Publius Licinius Gallienus, 268, Roman soldiers raided the college and, before burning it to the ground, stole the books from its library and took them to Rome. Thus, a copy of the Act Canobiline ended up with Roman priests and was subsequently tabled at the First Council at Nice, Cumbrian Abbey records. King Canobiline had a twin brother called Judas Thomas, who was Thomas the twin, recorded in the New Testament. In Old Gospels, Thomas, also called Didymus, a translation of Tama, meaning twin. The Acts of Thomas presented Thomas as Judas Thomas, that is, Judas the twin. The Church said that the 11th Act of Thomas introduces Thomas the twin, the other, Didymus, as an identical twin who is the Lord himself. In other ancient Christian writings called the Book of Thomas, Judas Thomas is explicitly called Jesus' brother and double. And church records clearly confirm that during the early centuries, Judas Thomas was considered not only Jesus' blood brother, but also his identical twin. Judas the twin, Thomas, was given the name Christus early in his life, and he developed a body of followers called Christians. He recruited from the inhabitants of Gamala and the area of Galilee, and they later became the apostles of the New Testament as stories of the two brothers became overlaid. The church record that the field of gospel history had its beginnings in remote Galilee, or Galilee. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Galilee. I'll say Galilee. The most northerly of the three provinces of Palestine, Galilee, Samaria, Judea, and included the large eastern areas of Iturea, Tyrannus, and Lysanias. Eastern Upper Galilee, measuring approximately 50 miles north to south and 120 miles east to west. It was bounded in the west by the coastal plain along which ran the road from Egypt to Phoenicia. The caravan routes from the coast of Damascus and east crossed its southern part through the valley of Esdraelon. In Old Testament times, King Hiram was unimpressed with the 20 Galilean towns. Solomon gave him a payment for services. He called the inhabitants Cubal, meaning good for nothing, and their despised reputation endured into New Testament times. Josephus described them as only representations of living things, for Galilee was known as the insurgent district of the country. The inhabitants were described as a restless, excitable body of people, remote from the center of power. Ecclesiastical and secular, the Romans had more trouble with the Galileans than the natives of any other province. The messiahs all started out from Galilee and never failed to collect followers around the standard. The Gospels stated that Jesus Christ was a Galilean in Matthew 26:70, with 12 followers, Matthew 26:70, it abbreviates Matthew here. In Matthew 26:70, with 12 followers, but that was in reality Judas Christus. Josephus called the followers of Christus his disciples, and Spanish-born, British-educated governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, asserted in Luke 23:5 that the Galileans were rabble rousers who set about to stir up the people. It was Judas Christus who said, I have come not to bring peace, but a sword, and instructed his followers to equip themselves with swords and clubs. The church later presented those men as pious apostles of Jesus Christ, but they were in reality the militia of Judas Christus and called Christians with a KH instead of a CH. They were a poor, dirty set without manners, clad in filthy garbadines and smelling strongly of garlic. The reality of the issue is that now called early Christian, again, Christian from KH Christian movement was actually a body of brutal Galilean militants. And that explains why modern day Christian encyclopedias and dictionaries fail to record A through Z entries under the headline of Galilean. See Catholic encyclopedias, it says. That is a particularly strange omission, for the Church proudly states that the early Christians were called Galileans and apostles, except Judas Iscariot, or Iscariot, were all Galileans. Yet it is reticent to fully describe the history and nature of the Galileans. The premise for the conclusion in the Bible fraud was that Jesu Canobaline and Judas Christus were of royal birthright and legitimate contenders to the throne of Palestine and emperorship of the Roman Empire. Gospel appellations such as King of the Jews and Son of God were legitimate titles because of the tradition of the time and the royal status of their parents. There are over 40 New Testament references to the twins being sons of God and born of a king, confirmed by Nathanael, who said to Jesus, "You are the King of Israel." However, there is no record in world history of a person called Jesus Christ ever being King of Israel, and the reason for the blank page is fully explained in the earlier book. After the death of his father, King Constantine amassed a powerful army in Britain, composed wholly of local British warriors, and began to prepare to cross the sea to the continent to engage co-emperor Maxentius, Roman emperor 306 to 312 in battle. Constantine sailed with his army, landing on the shores in what is today Germany, and then consulted the mouthpiece of God, Irenaeus, the celebrated oracles of the Sibylline books. Following his interpretation of the prophecies, Constantine was confident that the enemy would be destroyed in battle. After listening to the oracles, he accepted the advice and advanced forward for a military encounter at the Mavilian Bridge in October 312. The site of the famous battle, the armies of Constantine and Maxentius clashed, and the British, under the shrewd leadership of Constantine, won an overwhelming victory. The rapacious and cruel Maxentius died in 313 and was completely routed, and his earlier seizure of Rome and the subsequent persecution of its people ended. King Constantine, with his warriors, marched victoriously onto Rome, where he received a massive welcome. Amid great rejoicing, he ascended in the imperial throne and assumed the purple, and was officially acclaimed by the Senate and the populace of Rome as emperor. By 324, and after a series of lesser battles, the bloodthirsty and ruthless Flavius Constantine singularly ruled as king and emperor of the entire Roman Empire, Britain, Gaul, and Spain. One of King Constantine's main fears was that of uncontrollable religious disorder amongst the teeming populace. Roman expectations of religion functions was to maintain a stable relationship between the gods and the state, and Rome's past success was its justification. The peculiar type of oratory expounded the presbyters and their numerous gods was a challenge to the settled religious order that King Constantine desired. In 313, a bitter argument developed between the bodies of presbyters headed by Donatus, a bishop who gave his name to a schism that was later called the Donatus movement. At the time, groups of presbyters and bishops violently clashed over the attributes of their various gods, and altar was set against altar, in competing for an audience. Eventually, a Roman edict of totalitarian granting presbyters the right to practice their discourses was issued. By that time, groups of presbyters had developed many gods and many lords, and various religious sects sprang up, each with differing gospels and varying lists of apostles. The toleration one, however, would have no legal basis unless it had the final imprimatur of the priestly college originally established by Julius Caesar. Earlier reforms introduced by Emperor Diocletian originally Diocles 285 to 305, reached their full development only under Constantine, who gave some support to the presbyters but could not bring about settlement between rival god factions. Constantine never acquired a solid theological knowledge about the presbyters' gods and depended heavily on his adversaries in religious questions. In official Roman records, he noted that among the numerous Presbyterian factions, strife had grown so serious, vigorous action was necessary to establish more religious states. His advisors cautioned him that the presbyters' religion were destitute of foundation and needed official stabilization. Constantine saw in this confused system of fragmented beliefs the opportunity to create a new and combined state religion of neutral concept and protect it by law. When he conquered the East in 324, he sent his Spanish religious advisor, Osius of Cordoba, to Alexandria, with letters to several bishops exhorting them to make peace among their own. For as long as you continue to contend about your various gods and insignificant questions, it is not fitting that portions of God's people should be under the direction of your judgment, since you are divided among yourselves. The mission failed, and Constantine, probably at the suggestion of Osius, then issued a decree commanding all presbyters and their subordinates be mounted on asses, mules, and horses belonging to the public and travel to the city of Nice in the Roman province of Bithynia, a country of Asia. They were instructed to bring with them the testimonies they orated to the rabble, wrapped and bound in leather for protection during the long trip, and surrender them to Constantine upon their arrival in Nice or in Nicaea. Their writings totaled in all 2,231 scrolls and legendary tales of gods and saviors, together with a record of the doctrines orated by them. The first of three individual sightings was convened on the summer solstice, 21 June 325, and held in a hall in Osius' palace, who held the chief place there in Nicaea in his own name. So this is where it's starting to get into the Council of the Nicaea. The first of three individual sittings was convened on the summer solstice in 21 June 325 and held in a hall in Osius' palace, who held the chief place there in Nicaea in his own name. It was a remarkable event that provided many details of early clerical thinking and presented a clear picture of the intellectual phenomena that prevailed at the time. It was at the Council of the Nicaea that Christianity had its beginning, and the ramifications of decisions made at the time are difficult to calculate. Pause. The two gods of Christianity. The Church admitted that vital elements of proceedings at Nicaea are strangely absent from the canons, and the suspicion exists that documentation recording the true nature of the creation of Jesus Christ was later suppressed or destroyed. However, using records that endured, Bishop Eusebius occupied the first seat on the right of the emperor and delivered the inaugural address. This is where it starts to get very interesting. If you guys have stuck around so far and you've made it through the thick part of this chapter, that is a slightly confusing, but nonetheless gives and delivers historical context. Smash that thumbs up button and subscribe. We do appreciate the love and the support. All right. On the emperor's behalf, the documentation available revealed that there were no British churchmen in attendance at the council, for most delegates were Greek. 70 Eastern bishops represented Asiatic factions, and small numbers came from other areas. Cecilian of Carthage traveled from Africa. I'm going to butcher some of these names, guys. Paphnutius from Egypt. Nicasius of Dai from Gaul, and Damus of Stridon made the journey from Pannonia. It was at the Plural Assembly and under cult conditions that 2,048 bishops, priests, deacons, subdeacons, acolytes, and exorcists gathered to debate and decide on a unified belief system that encompassed only one God. Sheesh. By that time, a huge assortment of wild texts circulated amongst presbyters, and no list of accepted or canonical writings existed. Many of these Gospels, epistles, and revelations are listed in the lost books of the Bible later in this book, and some still carry the names of great variety of Eastern and Western divinities. The men argued violently among themselves, expressing various personal motives for inclusion of particular writings that prompted the finer traits of their own special God. When speaking of the conclave of presbyters gathered at Nicaea, Sabinus, the bishop of Heraclea, said in an account of the proceedings, excepting Constantine himself and Eusebius, Themiphilus, they were a set of illiterate, simple creatures who understood nothing. Dr. Richard Watson, a delusioned Christian historian and previously Bishop of Llandaff in Wales, referred to them as a set of gibbering idiots or gibbering idiots. After a lifetime of research into the church councils, he concluded that the clergy at the Council of the Nice were nearly all under the power of the devil, and the convention was composed of the lowest rabble and patronized the vilest abominations. It was that infantile body of men who were responsible for the commencement of the new Roman religion and the subsequent creation of Jesus Christ. A Libyan presbyter named Arius, in attendance at Nice, or the Council of the Nice, expressed concern that the bishops shall develop two gods, and that ancient statement caused confusion in the church for centuries. Pious Christian historians confessed that they didn't understand its meaning and ascribed it to the peculiar interposition of heaven. However, in light of current understanding, from particularly the Vatican scroll discovery, it is now possible to determine what Arius meant, and it provides major conflictions with the Church's presentation of Jesus Christ. Up until the Council of the Nice, Roman aristocracy primarily worshipped two Greek gods, Apollo and Zeus, but the great bulk of common people idolized Julius Caesar. Excluding the first letter in Caesar's name, the remainder of the word had great significance in the community, namely, Acer is the Etruscan for God, C being the Roman numeral 100. Because of that godly connection, Caesar was defied by the Roman Senate 5 days after his death, 15 March 44 BC. It was subsequently venerated as the divine Julius. Because he was Roman and father of the empire, he was the most popular god among the rabble for more than 400 years. His followers were called Caesarians, and so revered was the divine Julius that at least three ancient provincial cities were named Caesarea in his honor, one each in Palestine, northern Africa, and Cappadocia. At the Palestinian Caesarea, Josephus described as massive structures built and dedicated in the first century to honor the divine Julius. Directly opposite that harbor entrance, upon a high platform, rose the Temple of Caesar, remarkable for its beauty and its great size. In it stood a colossal state of Caesar, not inferior to Zeus at Olympia, and one of the gods or goddess of Roma equal to the Argive statue of Hera. The Temple of Caesar stood until around the mid 6th century, indicating that inhabitants proudly preserved their ancient edifice, perhaps as a revered relic to the divine Julius sometime later. A Christian church was built on the northwestern flank of the site of Caesar's temple directly over the temple foundation using some original stones. Archaeologists at the site were puzzled by the chronological discrepancy between what they believed was the Christianizing of the Roman Empire with Emperor Constantine and the construction of a Christian church some 300 years or so later. They wondered how most imperial and Roman city in Palestine They wondered how the most imperial and Roman city in Palestine, episcopal, episcopal see of Bishop Eusebius, could preserve and honor a so-called pagan temple. For so many Christian centuries, clearly archaeologists were accepting the orthodox presentation of Christian developments and were yet to realize that there was no Christianity until well after the Council of the Nice. It is probable that Constantine cited the summit at Nicaea because it was the original home of Julius Caesar's clan. Oleus, hence Julius, remains of a temple structure exists there today, and the probability is that it was originally built in honor of the Julius family or Julius Caesar himself. Some archaeological evidence suggests that Nicaea was called Caesarea in 4th century, in the 4th century, but principal Catholic authors and celebrated doctors of the Sorbonne in Paris, Louis Dupin, in 1725, claimed that it was called number one Caesar or N1 Caesar, and that was later vocalized as Nicaea. Part of the Caesar name is still carried in the word today and enhances Dupin's reasoning. Because the general Roman populace adored the divine Julius, he was the most fashionable god in Western presbyters' text, but was not recognized in Eastern or Oriental writings. Constantine's intention at Nicaea was to create a new god for the empire that would unite all religion and factions under one deity, and presbyters were permitted to debate and decide upon who the new god would be. Throughout the meeting, the howling factions were immersed in heated debates and attempts to promote their own divinity in the name of 53 gods, and 53 gods were tabled for discussion. As yet, the new god had not been selected by the council, and so they balloted in order to determine the matter. For 1 year and 5 months, the balloting lasted. Geez, they voted on this for a whole entire year. At the end of that time, Constantine returned to the gathering to discover that presbyters had not agreed on a new deity, but had balloted down to a short list of 5 prospects, namely Caesar, Krishna, Mithra, right? We did a video on Mithra, okay, in the previous video breakdown. If you guys are new here, make sure you guys go check that out. Horus, and Zeus. Constantine was the ruling spirit at Nicaea and ultimately decided the new god for them. He determined that the name of his 2 first-century descendants, Jesu Canobiline and Judas Christus, be joined as one. Jesu Christus, and that would be the official name of the new Roman god. A vote was subsequently taken, and it was with a majority show of hands that both men became one god. 161 votes to 157. Following long-standing heathen customs, Constantine used the official gathering in the Roman Apotheos decree to legally defy the new god for the rabble, and did so by democratic consent and with the blessing of the presbyters in attendance. A new Roman god was proclaimed and officially ratified by the Emperor Constantine. That purely political act of defecation effectively and legally placed Jesu Canobiline and Judas Christus among the Roman gods as one individual composition today called Jesus Christ, and lent earthly existence in 2 forms to the emperor's new deity. At the time, historical records revealed that the Christian religion had not yet developed, and the few church documents that refer to an established Christian God previous to the Council of Nicaea are later forgeries, written retrospectively. Bishop Taylor's assertion is supported in later chapters. During the course of the proceedings at Nicaea, the Sabelline books were again consulted and another unified prophecy found. The Sabelline books were again consulted and another unfulfilled prophecy found. It predicted that an everlasting gospel to preach to them would be written for those that dwell on earth until they have climbed from the pit of slime. The legality of these Sibyl's writings had been earlier established under the Emperor Augustine, or Augustine. When he transferred a special pontifex collection to the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill in Rome, under the Roman religious policy, King Constantine had administrative license to introduce new testimonies for the empire and did. Up until that time, a great variation of texts were in use, and presbyters preferred versions that featured stories of their favorite personal gods. Because the divine Julius Caesar was son of God on earth, and most Western presbyters' orations, their writings applied to him the theology of their early story of the twin of Roman boys, Romulus and Remus, born under curious circumstances in 753 BC to an earthly virgin mother with a mystical god as a father in heaven. The attempt by reigning King Aemilius to forestall a threat to his rule involving danger to the children, a royal bloodline through kingly Venusian descent, and the crucifixion and ascension of Romulus into heaven to become Quirinius and sit on the right-hand side of God. The legends surrounding the life of Krishna formed the primary outline of the ascetic presbyters' writings, and they developed from the story of his fabled incarnation around 10,000 BC. The life story of Krishna is recorded in the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, which I have an entire collection of here. Would love to get into that with you guys one day, and carry similarities to the fables built up for the divine Julius. His virgin mother, Devaki, was miraculously conceived by a mysterious God in heaven, and his special birth announced by a star. He was depicted as a meek person who preached nobly in parables and washed the feet of Brahmins. Period of life and spiritual insight were distinguished traits in the character of his oriental sin atoning savior, and that he was often moved with compassion for the downtrodden and the suffering. Krishna met with his death by crucifixion upon a tree at the hands of his enemies, with a later variation declaring that he was tied to a cross shaped tree and pierced with 3 arrows. However, there is another aspect to the development of the Gospels, and that involves the Druidic philosophy. History recorded that an untitled manuscript and 10 similarly untitled letters were in the possession of Marculus, the son of an elderly noble Briton. Marculus was born in circa 96, and it was variously recorded that he died sometime between 164 and 168. Tertullian's reference was mankind's first record of the manuscript that could be associated with Christianity, and its existence throws new light on the complex nature of the New Testament. Marculus was a Druid and Tungris, known as Marculus of Britain. He was a descendant of King Jesu Canobiline and part of the community at Trevon in Wales that was traditionally the home of Canobiline and his family. Marculus exercised the chief influence in the development of the Celtic Church in southern Wales, and his family was closely associated with Prince Linus, the son of King Caradoc and grandson of Jesu Canobiline. The premise in this work is that Marcellus's document was written by the King Canobiline and recorded at the esoteric principles and spiritual beliefs of the Druidic priesthood. In its original form, it was a highly regarded first century instructional manual called the Palsgate Testimonies and referred to in King Canobiline's records as the Act of Canobiline. The word Palsgate meant entrance to the foundation of knowledge, and the information that the document preserved appeared to reveal ancient Druidic values that had descended from remote antiquity by initiation. It was through corruption of Marcullus's name that he was later called Marcion or Marcus in church writings. That type of translation, variation, or substitution is important to understand when unraveling presbyter's text. According to the Tertullian, Irenaeus Clement, Marculus was in Rome during 137 and 138 and narrated his testimonies to those that would listen. The statement was taken to mean that Marculus orated from the untitled text in his possession and from the name Tertullians, writing adverse Marcus against Marcion. The Presbyterial movement was opposed to Marculus's dissertations. Marculus's influence was great, as Saint Epiphanius. I'm so sorry, y'all, if I'm butchering these names. They're pretty hard to contextualize and say out loud. Writing in the 4th century recorded that followers of Marculus were found throughout the whole world, and Bishop Saint Cyril of Alexandria in 444, around the same time, threatened his gatherers not to attend Marcionite assemblies by mistake. With his brief documentation, Marculus found a belief system that spread rapidly throughout the Roman Empire and continued for more than 600 years after his death. From Constantine's point of view, there were several religious factions that needed to be satisfied, and he instructed Bishop Eusebius to organize the compilation of a uniform collection of new writings developed from various aspects in the text available. His instructions were simple. Search ye these books, and whatever is good in them retain, but whatsoever is evil cast away. What is good in one book, write ye with that which is good in another book, and whatsoever is thus brought together shall be called the book of books, and that shall be the doctrine of my people, which I will recommend unto all nations, that there shall be no more war for religion's sake. The books were written accordingly. Make them so astonish in Constantine, using the philosophic teachings of 1st century King Jesu Canobiline from Acta Canobiline as his exemplar. Eusebius amalgamated the legendary tales of all the religious doctrines of the world from the presbyter's manuscripts at his disposal. The merging of the supernatural God stories with the religious principles of the King Canobiline effectively joined the orations of Eastern and Western presbyters with British Chaldean religions together as one. With a completed collection of the writings that Constantine thought would unite all variants of religious factions, Eusebius arranged for scribes to produce 50 sumptuous copies to be written on parchment in legible manners. in a convenient, portable form by professional scribes thoroughly accomplished in their art. These orders, said Eusebius, were followed by the immediate execution of the work itself, which we sent him in a magnificently and elaborately bound volume of threefold and fourfold forms. They were the new Roman testimonies. They were the new Roman testimonies, and that was the first mention in world history of finished copies of what later became the New Testament. Some of these gospels recorded Julius Caesar, Lord Krishna, and Yesu or Jesu Christus as the Christian deity, and those names are found in old copies of the New Testament produced in the 16th century. Around the same time, the church ordered its revisionists to rewrite the Bible. With this instructions fulfilled, King Constantine then decreed that the New Testimonies would thereafter be called the Word of the Roman God and official to all religions operating in the Roman Empire. He then ordered all Presbyterial manuscripts destroyed by fire, and any man found in concealing one should be stricken off from his shoulders or beheaded. As the record shows, previous writings of the pulpiteers no longer exist, although some individual segments survive, the Gospel of Peter being one example. For the next 2 centuries, the New Testimonies were called the Constantine Collection, and additional false narratives were built in as they developed. Constantine then transferred the use of the latter place to the Bishop of Rome and ordered Macarius of Jerusalem, who died in 333, to design the fair structure and build a place of gathering. It was British royalty through King Constantine that authorized the world's first now called Christian church for Roman religionists, and that they subsequently developed into the Church of Rome. Constantine later ordered the construction of a new city on the site of ancient Byzantium. I'm so sorry if I butchered that one. Named after himself and made it capital of the Roman Empire. Constantinople was solemnly consecrated in 330, and the transfer of the empire from Rome to Byzantium was a great masterstroke in history of civilization. In a few short years, Constantinople was the center of the world, but a later church council denounced it, decreeing that it shall now be called New Rome and have the same privileges as Old Rome because it is the second city in the world. Some old documents state that the Council of Nicaea ended in mid-November 326, while others said the struggle to establish a god was so fierce it extended 4 years and 7 months. Whenever it ended, the savagery and violence it encompassed was disguised by a glossy title, the Great and Holy Synod, assigned by the Church in the 18th century. The earlier Church, however, expressed a different opinion. The Second Council of the Nicaea in 785 to 787 denounced the First Council of the Nicaea as a synod of fools and madmen, and sought to annul the decisions passed by men with troubled brains, a bid. If one chose to read the records of the Second Nicene Council and noted references to the affrighted bishops and soldiery needed to quell proceedings, the fools of madmen declarations were surely an example of the pot calling the kettle black. King Constantine died in 337, and his decision to merge the now called pagan beliefs into the new religion of Jesu Christus brought many converts. Thus, from a period of time in which mob rule and tyranny reigned supreme in the new church, a series of concocted presbyters, commentaries filled with impositions and fables falsely ascribed to most holy apostles by fraudulent individuals, became the official religious documents of the Roman Empire directly under the control of emperor cult of the state. Later, church writers made Constantine the great champion of Christianity, and it was given a legal status as the religious or the religion of Rome. Later, church writers made Constantine the great champion of Christianity, and it was given a legal status as the religion of the Roman Empire. Church records show that was incorrect, where it was self-interest which led him to first adopt Christianity. But at the time, it wasn't called Christianity. King Constantine's now God was not immediately accepted, and resistance offered by Roman custom compelled his successors to return to the early position. A council of Western presbyters was held in Sardicia in 347 and tried to reinstate the divine Julius as the Roman god. Constantine's nephew Emperor Julian from 361 to 363 also opposed the religion of Jesu or Jesu Christus because the Christian, again spelled with a KH, movement had slaughtered most of his family. Emperor Julian was an initiate into the mysteries of Eliseus and Sibyl Etis, and had a much more sophisticated knowledge of Christianity, knowing its newly fabricated nature. The reader would err greatly if he or she supposed that the early church assemblies were made up of a noble body of gentlemen quietly sitting down to converse in a formal manner about pious problems that had come to them for discussion and settlement. On the contrary, they were infantile, self centered, and aggressive affairs, and their modern day portrayal as dignified and stately events is deliberate misrepresentation of record church history. Celebrated Christian historian Dean Millman summarized the general nature of the church councils. Nowhere is Christianity less attractive, and if we look to the ordinary tone of character of the proceedings, less authoritative than in the council of the church. The degeneracy is rapid from the Council of the Nicaea from 325 to the first of Ephesus in 431, where each party came determined to use every means of haste, maneuver, court influence, and bribery to crush his adversary. Where there was an encouragement of, if not an appeal to the violence of the populace to anticipate the decree of the council, where each had his own tumultuous foreign rabble to back his quarrel, and neither would scruple at any means to obtain ratification of their enthymesis through persecution by the civil government. The council were peculiar events and procedures used in the mentality of the men involved in their administration is of prime importance in the understanding and the development of Christianity. Although Constantine had earlier defied Jesus Christus, the new religion became official to the Roman Empire only after 381, when Emperor Theodosius in 395 imposed it on his subjects. In the modern church, presentation of the nature of procedures involved is unrestrained imagination. In May 381, he summoned the first of three peculiar assemblies at Constantinople, which were as an aggregate called by some the Second General Council of the Church, and reapplied Jesus Christus as the Roman deity. However, Presbyterial groups were still deeply divided about the choice of the god, and bitterness between them resulted in only Eastern presbyters attending the first meetings. There were 150 presbyters at the gathering, and they were under the direction of Mad Meletius, a bishop from Antioch. The Egyptian and Western presbyters refused to attend, and Bishop Nectarius, with 287 presbyters, conducted a competitive council at Aquilae in Venetia, near Venice today. At the conclusion of the deliberations, they petitioned the Eastern presbyters at the second meeting in 382 to meet for discussions between all parties at the Alexandria and northern Egypt. But the request was denied. The dissatisfied Western bishops then traveled to Constantinople and convened a third council in 383, when Nectarius demanded the Emperor Theodosius consider their majority views. However, he refused and issued laws that signed death warrants of major earlier religions, and they came to a sudden end. The records of the outcome of the meetings are clouded under the name of the Council of the Nicaea to give them greater weight and authority, but what is recorded of the next council at Ephesus in 431 revealed that the presbyters' godly problems were still unsolved. The empire gradually absorbed and adapted to its own ends the multitude of cults derived from all its parts, and over the ensuing centuries coupled them together as one. The Roman Universal Church, known today as the Roman Catholic Church, henceforth much of the literature written from the time on was aimed at propagating a fabricated faith to the world and ensuring Roman emperors were given perpetual places as heads of church and state. After Christianity had become the established religion of the Roman Empire at the end of the 4th century, the Roman emperors convened a succession of councils which were called Euseminatial, Universal, or General. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, and thus developed a series of 19 gatherings over the next 1,200 years, about which considerable doubt exists respecting the genuineness of their decisions. Holy rabbit hole. Jeez Louise, now you guys understand why I wanted to get that one out to you guys. Man, oh man, that was just chapter 4 of this book here, The Crucifixion of Truth. Again, if you guys are new to the channel, We're not here to say anything is right or wrong. We are just here to read books that exist that go otherwise unnoticed to the general public and the masses. The book that we read today was The Crucifixion of Truth by Tony Bushby. Extremely hard to get your hands on a copy of this. I'm super grateful that I was able to get one. Right now on Amazon, this book is roughly around $1,200 used with only one copy left in stock. So this just goes to show the power that exists inside a book like this. Many more to come here at Library of Awakening. We do appreciate the love and the support. If you were able to spend the entire hour with me here reading this book, do me a favor, smash that thumbs up button and subscribe. We do appreciate the love and the support. Don't forget that if you guys want access to our vast catalog of books, I'm talking about thousands upon thousands of books shared inside our private CyberX Discord. You guys can head over to cyberxtraining.com. You guys can always lock in with us heading into this new year. Enlighten yourselves and expand your mentality and your awareness of so many different topics. With that being said, many blessings to you guys. Be cognizant, be aware out there, and I'll see you guys in the next video breakdown. I know some of the perspectives that I share may be as challenging for you as they once were for me. But isn't that the beauty of exploration? Every perspective, no matter how unconventional, has something valuable to contribute to it if it's shared. Knowledge is not absolute. It's a living, breathing phenomena, shaped and reshaped over time. The important thing is not always be right, but to always be curious. Explore freely, share boldly, and learn deeply. And don't rely solely on others to validate your discoveries. Stand firm in integrity, even in the face of criticism. Remember that growth always means embracing the humility to admit when we're wrong. Learning from our errors is not a setback, it's the very essence of our progress. So, welcome to the journey. May this space inspire you to ask questions, explore the unknown, and most importantly, to awaken. This is the Library of Awakening,